Informed by my son about a beef between two rappers, Kendrick Lamar and the rapper Drake. Now, I am loosely familiar with their music. Of course, I've heard everything that's on the radio, and I've heard enough about them and their outside lifestyles to pretty much make an assessment of their personalities. Kendrick Lamar is from Compton, which is hell. It's just it is an integral part of my upbringing as a young man, being from Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles specifically. Those cities, Compton, Watts, Inglewood, South Central LA, before the rest of the cities chimed in, like Long Beach. If you weren't from those cities, or the east side of LA also, then you really weren't from the hood. It's when Snoop Dogg came along, he started telling people, yeah, Long Beach this, Long Beach that. People start giving, he basically put Long Beach on the map. But for the most part, those inner cities, those enclaves within LA County, there's developed a special mentality and a special culture. Charleston White said it best, it's a reason why men from LA, black men especially from Los Angeles, are so quick to unalive other black men. He himself moved from Texas to Los Angeles, and he understood, having lived there, he understood the mentality. And for the most part, growing up in LA, you realize that you are surrounded by killers. You are literally surrounded by people who are inclined to unalive you. There's a constant threat there. There's a constant chance that something bad will find you. In most other civilized societies, you have to literally look for trouble. But in Los Angeles and Compton and Inglewood and Watts, there's a certain mentality that, trouble will find you, whether you're looking for it or not. You really can't avoid it. It's what made me come up with the notion that I discuss in my book when I relate to the last summer I was in Los Angeles, and I realized that hell is no respecter of persons. If you're living in hell, you're bound to get burned. So whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or whether you're a hardened, inner city gang member, you're still subject to, suffer the consequences of living in such a hostile, openly hostile place. And the mentality hasn't changed. And based on Kendrick Lamar, one of his first things he did with his money was purchase himself a house, and not a huge house, but a small house, relatively speaking. And it lets me know that that young man was dealing with a lot. He experienced a lot of loss. He's very practical, and there's a certain fear that comes along with losing everything when you grow up in those sort of environments. Drake, a young man from Toronto, Canada, whose mother is white or Jewish, and his father is an African American. We saw him first on a television show called Degrassi. The mere fact that one of his parents is white tells you a lot about his father, and you can speculate as to his upbringing. And it's, irrespective of how he feigns hood life or how tough he is, there's really no place like Compton, South Central, Los Angeles, Watts, California, Inglewood. It's just that the violence is mechanized and it's cultural. You're living in a place where uncontrolled, random violence is cultural, but it's not even random. It's it's sanctioned, it's targeted. And so imagine the mentality of a person or a group of people who live there, coming from where many of our ancestors came from, and that is the southern parts of the United States, where they fled from Jim Crow. They fled from an oppressive, dominant culture that saw them as second and third class citizens. They saw them as not even worthy of intermixing with the dominant members of the society. And so then they fled to places like Los Angeles and Oakland, California, and other parts of, of California, where many of our ancestors, many of our relatives stayed, you know, and it's been since the 1950s when that migration happened. And so they go from that to this mentality, they go from that to this place. And, you know, without going into an anthology of how we got to that point being is that when you grow up in Los Angeles, you get used to living around killers. You get used to living around people who will take it above and beyond what is necessary to recidify the injustice that they deem has transpired against them. It is a reason why you see Kendrick Lamar with his multiple diss tracks back to back to back to back to back. And in Drake's latest response, the most he can do is, you know, use some recycled prison talk about being in PC and how he got DP'd, which is a language in which he really should not be using, because when you use that language, you call that certain energy to you. When you start pretending, when you start utilizing that gang affiliated, that prison lingo, there's a certain energy that comes to you. And this is why so many rappers have died on the West Coast, whether it be Tupac, who was originally from New York, who didn't truly understand the culture of South Los Angeles, died in Nevada and Las Vegas at the hands of a South Los Angeles resident who's affiliated, and Biggie Smalls, who, for all intents and purposes, didn't really have a beef with Tupac, and he ended up being unalived while caravanning from one location to another. It's a different kind of place. It's when you're surrounded by people who have that mentality. Even some of our rappers who you would think are nice, friendly guys, like MC Hammer, had a notorious reputation in that if you said anything about him, even playfully, in a rap album, he would literally try to unalive you, you know, through his henchmen. You know, MC Search, who's one of the white rappers, is notorious incident that he discusses about even now, where there was a hit put out on his life, which some say was sourced at MC Hammer and his brother, who were affiliated with a well-known narcotics dealer out of Oakland. That when MC Search and his rap group came to Los Angeles after saying something about MC Hammer's mother, they had guns drawn on them, and they were chased throughout the city by you know, blue rag representatives who live on 60th Street and thereabouts. People like Redman, East Coast rappers, LL Cool J, many of them can tell you stories, because it is a certain mentality that you develop when you're surrounded by people who are willing to unalive you and have no fear of the consequences. And so I say all that to say I am comfortable around killers. I literally have raised my sons to be men who are able to take the lives of others if necessary. Of course, they have a different mentality being raised in the suburb. Their father's an attorney and all these different things. But even my wife, my lady, over the past years, I've helped her develop a mentality, and I basically told her that it is perfectly okay to, defend yourself and be the person who is willing to defend yourself with extreme prejudice. I started off by, you know, coaxing her into weight training, which is very difficult for some women because, of course, they all say, I don't want to be a man. But she's taken to it very well. And now she's recently has taken up jujitsu and also the striking arts through Shotokan and Shotokan karate and Muay Thai. Very violent endeavors. But the thing is, it is a culture. And the reason I'm able to do this is because I am perfectly okay with being around people who present a threat to even my life, whether it be my own children or my lady, because this is how I grew up. And I say all that to say that this beef that exists between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, considering Kendrick Lamar and the people around him and how little life means to people around him, it's going to be very difficult for Drake to travel in and out of California, And this is because at the end of the day, you have people who are ready, willing, and able to do harm to you and your entourage and the people that you care about. And irrespective of their, street gang affiliation, they'll do it just because, this is where they're from. And this is a lesson for you folks, and I'll call you the social media generation. You're so used to dealing with reasonable people. You feel as though you can say what you want to say on the internet. You can make these comments. You can say disrespectful things to people because you haven't lived around people. You've lived through social media your whole life. You've been able to get away with it. And so you really don't know how to respect other people's boundaries. You think that your right to free speech usurps other people's rights to respond to your insults. You think that you shouldn't have to suffer the consequences. Yeah, you have a free speech right. The government can't tell you what to do, but you could very well be unalived or hurt tremendously because you've offended the wrong people. It's a lack of respect. And unfortunately, if you don't respect someone, there are other people who realize, and I do this too, where respect is unavailable, fear is sufficient, as long as you respect my boundaries. And when you grow up in an environment like that, in my fundamental years and it wasn't just street violence, this is a mentality of the people in my home, the people in my grandmother's home where I grew up, relatives, family members, cousins, embattled physical violence that exists between each family members out of respect for boundaries. And if boundaries are overstepped, fear. And this is where this mentality comes from. It's almost like, I would assume, being in a situation where you're in a war zone. And, it can happen at any time. And when I say happen and I'm referring to bad things. People have a lack of respect. People have a lack of respect for their fellow man and woman. People assume that you're supposed to respond in a reasonable way. But the problem is, and this is the naivete of this generation, you can't control how someone else responds to you after you've done them wrong or affronted them. You can't control that. You have no control over that. That's something that, people who are properly socialized learn very early. As a member of Generation X, we didn't have social media. We had to walk to school. We had to walk home from school. if you said something erroneous to someone, that was a lie about their character, or if you offended them in some kind of way, you may very well have to see them in an unprotected environment. Our parents didn't wait in the school line to pick us up. We literally had a key, and most of us a 15 to 20-minute walk home after school, and you were by yourself. And so my generation learned, we were a feral generation, and we learned to respect our fellow man and woman, because even if you offended a woman, a girl, she may have brothers and relatives and men who cared about her, and you would have to see them. And what happened to you was deemed reasonable. If you harm somebody, yeah, some people often take it too far, but you know, as they say, dead men don't speak. All they know is that they're dead. And so you could very well end up unalive because you said something or did something that offended someone. And I think Drake, my suggestion to people like him who think they can say what they want to say is you have to realize there's just some people that you should not mess with. There are just some people that do not have an off button. There are some people who've experienced so much trauma and so much pain, and who've experienced so much loss that they literally have to go out of their way to control their urges. You happy people, God bless you. I'm happy for you. You had a happy upbringing with a mom and a dad and a nice lifestyle. That's beautiful. And that's wonderful. And we wish that for all of our children, I would think. We wish a healthy upbringing, a stable life for all of our children. But then there are those who experience violence at an early age. There are those who witness violence at an early age. There are those who were raised in a culture where violence was always an underlying threat. There's always that fear of violence. And, those type of people, you should really, I would suggest just let them be, leave them alone. Because if not them, then there are those around them from that same culture that may see your life as nothing more than worthless. I don't mind empowering the people around me. I don't mind. I empower my woman. I had an event recently where I talked to a group of church women, and I discussed why, I want my woman to be deadly. Why I want her to be able to defend herself. And if I had daughters, I would do the same thing. I've done the same thing for my sons. I'm not afraid of empowering my woman, whether it be through helping her finish law school so that she can be successful, whether it be helping her learn how to physically defend herself and giving her the tools, be it firearms and knife training, so that she's a threat. I've done the same thing with my children. It takes a very confident man to be able to do that. A lot of men don't want that. They purposely want to keep their women in an oppressed position, not cooperative, not submissive, but literally oppressed, so she has no choice but to remain in the relationship if she wants to eat, if she wants to survive, if she wants to maintain that same lifestyle. I've literally empowered my woman through education, through physical fitness, and through training to be able to destroy me physically if she wants to. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. And I've done the same thing for my sons. They're getting to that point. And, because I'm used to it. I find it very interesting that oftentimes when I'm on my social media page, people will say things to me and then expect that I would be too big to respond. But I respond. And, I will admit that I do take pleasure in it sometimes. I take pleasure in, presenting a response that is so brutal and hostile to people that they said, oh man, this is an overkill. But remember, this is the environment that I grew up in. The 1970s and 80s and early 90s in South Central Los Angeles, we took we took pleasure in revenge. We took pleasure in retribution. This is the culture. Sometimes some people, they are waiting for conflict. They are not going to avoid it, and irrespective of you know, your thoughts on what limits should be imposed on a response or what is reasonable, some people don't operate like that. Some people, when you attack them, you present them with an opportunity to destroy you. And that's what's happened in this situation with Kendrick Lamar and Drake. Drake basically opened the door and presented Kendrick Lamar and anyone else who does not like him, or who for whatever their motivation be it jealousy, be it just dislike, he's opened the door and presented an opportunity for people to attack him. And when you have a person with this mentality that, you know, raised in a culture where they don't mind aliving even their own kind, their own people, their own race, you put yourself in a dangerous predicament. I think the wise among us would be wise if you would tread lightly and be careful. Be careful who you offend. Understand that although we live in a social media world where you think you can say things and get away with them, there are people who will spend the time, money, and resources to identify you. You all have seen me do it several times on these YouTube streets, where, you know, I've made examples out of people who, you know, may have been making disparaging statements, but again, I come from a culture where that is understood, and in fact, you develop a taste for it, an appetite for it, so to speak. I would go so far, well, I don't want to, but I would say I would go so far as to say some people enjoy revenge, and you want to be careful with offending people like that. They look for a reason to be offended. And there are people like that out there. And it's not that I am putting a stamp of approval on it. I'm just saying that had you grown up in a society that allows you to actually interact with people as opposed to social media, you had real life socialization, you would quickly learn that, especially as a child. As adults, we are taught to restrain ourselves. As children, especially adolescent children, you grow up, you exist around people with problems. Not having to deal with that bully head up, being able to tell the teacher or the resource officer at your school has made this generation and this group of Americans or cause for them to live in a bubble where they think they're safe and they're not. And, you know, unfortunately, that mentality that I spoke about earlier that developed in that Los Angeles area, it seems to be growing. As Ice Cube said once, the whole world is a ghetto, and he was referring to the Los Angeles or South LA ghetto. And it seems as though some aspects of society is getting softer, while other aspects of society is getting meaner and more vicious. And we are literally living in two different Americas. And so I've trained my children, I train my woman, and I keep myself at the point where I'm prepared to deal with, I'm prepared to deal with both aspects of society. Now, some of you all may say, well, what is the ultimate lesson here? You know, what are you trying to say? I guess be cautious. I guess I'm telling you that I've seen the patterns before, and I know the vicious nature of man, And it is always better to listen to your better angels. It's always better to refrain from attacking those who are, or only fight those who are fighting you, I would say. And also be mindful that you don't know the mind of another man or woman, and you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know what they're going to do in response. And you should be very knowledgeable of your adversary before you begin to, you know, resort to conflict with them, especially when there could be a, a physical manifestation of that conflict. Because at that point, um, people are playing for keeps. You don't want that.